Don't miss B.A.H.A.con 2023, the ultimate gathering for skeptics, atheists, humanists, and agnostics, with a dozen speakers, including R.N. Ra.
I want to ask a couple of questions. How many of us were born atheist, meaning without theism, and you never had theism? You never believed in a God? Okay, we got quite a few hands still up here. Now, by contrast, how many of you were raised to be religious? Almost everybody. You should put your hands up, I know. All right, now how many would you say that you embraced faith and spirituality at some point in your life? What is that, roughly half? Embraced it. Now, keep your hands up if there was at the time when you were no longer just a child and you believed your religion was true. Okay. And did you sincerely believe, not just pretending and going through the motions, but you really, honestly thought it was true? I'm going to guess that's around 30 of you. Yeah. All right. And then keep your hands up if, when other religious people find out that you don't believe anymore, did they ever tell you that you're not a true believer? Okay, thank you. You can put your hands down. And people have said that to me too, yet I, like you, was a truer believer than these self-proclaimed true believers are. I was a sincere believer. The problem is that I was more sincere than believer. The word sincere means free from pretense or deceit, proceeding from genuine feelings. I genuinely thought that there was a Jesus and a God as separate people because I was raised binitarian, not Trinitarian. I really thought that I had a non-corporeal soul and a supernatural afterlife to look forward to or dread, as the case may be. I never believed in magic, miracles. I thought that everything had to have a scientific explanation, even if we don't yet know what it is. But I did believe in what I call psionic powers, like telekinesis, telepathy, levitation, psychic capacity of the mind, because I thought, back in the 1970s, that was at least scientifically possible. It seems that everybody believed in those sorts of things back then. Yeah. Of course, now I realize that's all supernatural magic too, and supernatural and magic is kind of a tautology. If you use the word supernatural in a sentence, you could replace that word with either magical or imaginary and not change the content of the sentence. It'll still be just as accurate. But back then, I believed all of this so sincerely, I didn't know that faith was required. I defended my belief because I thought it was true and because I thought there was evidence to show that it was true. Of course, I eventually realized that all the evidence I thought I had of the so-called supernatural or paranormal or psychic phenomenon and all that wasn't as well supported or as factually accurate as I was misled to believe. Yet I was told that I had to believe all that anyway, or else face a threat of a fate worse than death if you don't believe it. So if you have to believe something, or if you just want to believe it, and there's no evidence for it, but you're determined to believe it anyway, like a fool, then all you can do is assume it on faith. When I realized that faith, in the context of religious belief, is an unreasonable conviction that is adopted and maintained independent of evidence and even in spite of evidence to the contrary, or to put that in other words, that faith is assumed without reason and defended against all reason, that's when I had to make a choice between being sincere and being a believer. Raise your hand again if you've ever met that crossroad. Quite a few. And that's why I have no problem with sincere believers, because they're the only ones who will change their mind when it is appropriate to do so, when the logic or evidence demands. Whereas I have encountered many other religious people who seem determined to defend the faith even if they already know or strongly suspect that it's not really true. For example, in 2012, the Texas Republican Party platform said that they were against critical thinking. And they were embarrassed when they published that, but we already knew. And the reason that they were against critical thinking was because it would challenge a student's fixed beliefs. And what is a fixed belief? That's one that will not change even when it's been disproved. Critical thinking would allow you to question your own assumptions and correct your errors. Faith does not allow either one. And sometimes believers will agree to disagree, saying, hey, you're not going to change my mind and I'm not going to change yours. Except that's not true. I can't change your mind because you don't care what the truth is. I'm amenable to reason. I care what the truth is. So you could change my mind if you could show me that what you believe is true, like I can. I find that self-professed believers have a different definition of belief than I do. If I say that I believe something, it means that this is what I think is truest or closest to the truth, but that I don't know that because I can't show it. Whereas self-described believers seem determined to make themselves and others believe, regardless whether it's true or not. I think they treat belief as a conscious act of will, of mind over matter, on the expectation that they might achieve the promised powers of Jesus or Neo if they could just believe hard enough to challenge reality. In other words, what they mean by believe is make-believe. And worse than that, they conflate conviction with knowledge, pretending to know things no one even can know, pretending as if being convinced of something is the same thing as knowing it. Since we're both using different definitions, and I will not use that word my way anymore because I know they will misuse it to equivocate, which means to conflate different definitions or contexts deliberately, deceptively. They know that me being faithful to my wife is not remotely like their having a faith-based belief in God. They know that I don't have faith and they don't have evidence, but they continue to lie about both of these things. And some people, ironically the ones who most often crow about their sincerely held religious beliefs, are more concerned with maintaining that belief than with how sincere it is. Because my experience with religious apologists has always been that their beliefs are full of pretense and deceit, being disingenuous in every way opposite of sincere. Case in point, on the very day that I was reborn in Christ, I went through a phase that many converts have, that sincere believers often do, regardless what religion they convert to. Once I accepted Jesus into my heart, I felt an almost dizzying and revitalizing, empowering euphoria that lasted for hours. I have since heard accounts like this from Muslims, Mormons, Buddhists, Hare Krishnas, and even polytheistic pagans. Devotees of each of these faiths sometimes recount a similar conversion experience to the one that I had. But because of my sincerity, in a moment of clarity, I asked my minister friend, how do I know that this feeling of elation is really the Spirit of Jesus and that it's not just some other spirit or just a trick of the mind? Because it matters what's true. And he grabbed me by both shoulders with a huge beaming smile and said, just keep telling yourself it's Jesus until you believe it. Just keep lying to yourself until you believe your own lie. His unabashed admission of shameless self-deception broke the spell. My deconversion from reborn Christian to agnostic was instantaneous. It took me a couple of days to decide whether I still believed in God anymore, because I got to be honest, and that's my biggest problem with religion. I always had trouble squeezing a God into a universe so seemingly devoid of deity and without any need of divinity. I believed in God only because so many people in my life told me that God was a conclusively proven scientific fact, which of course just turned out to be another lie, like every argument for God always is. And there are always faulty conclusions based on false premises, always from erroneous assumptions, never on actual factual data. That, and have you noticed that every logical fallacy you've ever read online has been used as an argument for God? And every argument for God is a logical fallacy? I didn't know yet what the word atheist meant back then, because I'd been told all these lies growing up. I was told that an atheist is someone who knows there is no God, or that an atheist believes in nothing. which is not to imply that we think that a reality is an illusion. Rather, it's just slander. It's where the faithful say that we believe in nothing when really we don't believe anything on faith. We don't make believe, is what they mean when they say we don't believe in it, when we say we believe nothing. Because believers have to frame everything in terms of belief, phrasing our position like a double negative, such that even a lack of belief becomes belief in a lack. Such that if we both assume that the natural universe exists, and you also propose an additional alternative universe that I do not assume, then instead of you, as a believer, justifying your belief in supernaturalism, which I don't believe because you can't substantiate your claims, then the believer will project their situation onto me as if I have the burden to prove my alleged belief in materialism. And what is materialism? Also known as philosophical naturalism. It's simply accepting evident reality as it is and not also assuming a magical alternative reality on top of that. How is that my belief in not magic and not their belief in magic? They're the ones that believe something more than I do. Believers habitually do this because faith hates nothing more than the burden of proof. The only way to avoid that is to project their own indefensible faults onto other people. It's like the tu quo qui fallacy of you're just as bad, or let's see, how is it? Or calling the pot calling the kettle black, except that in this case you're accusing other people of what you're doing, and you're the only one doing it, and they're not. So it's more like the pot calling the silverware black. It's the philosophical equivalent of I know you are, but what am I? So, of course, the wanna-pretenders gotta pretend as if we are them. As if they're the ones with reason and evidence, and the unbeliever is the believer, so that someone else has the belief and thus the burden of proof, and not them. So if you believe in a God and I don't, then rather than you honoring your obligation to substantiate your unwarranted and indefensible assertions of impossible absurdity, you'll try to pretend as if my lack of belief in your God becomes my belief in no Godism, which is exactly what believers like to pretend that atheism means. I've been told this lie all my life, and I didn't know better then. So I didn't identify as an atheist, because I didn't know what that meant, which is a good thing because I didn't go from Christian to skeptic straight away. I didn't know much about science or religion or history or anything yet, so I would have been a pretty poor example of an atheist. In fact, I was so credulous back then. I believed everything required to be hired as a Ghostbuster. Do you believe in ESP? Do you believe in UFOs, astral projections, mental telepathy, ESP, clairvoyance, spirit photography, full telekinetic movement, full trance mediums, the Loch Ness Monster, and the theory of Atlantis? When that movie came out, I remember how I bought into all that shit, and I didn't even have the promise of a steady paycheck from it. And remember that I thought that there was evidence for all these things, albeit most of that was in the form of anecdotal paranormal experiences or dubious claims from behind the Iron Curtain, things that were impossible to check out in a pre-internet age. So I wanted to explore spirituality myself to find the truth firsthand. Thus, for years, and this may be hard for some of you to believe, but I was an occultist. A sort of neo-pagan spiritualist attending seances and tarot readings, Wiccan and Druid rituals, and attempting astral projection through transcendental meditation. And in fact, I did have a few spiritual experiences that at the time I took to be real paranormal encounters, pretty dramatic ones too. And I remember explaining and exclaiming my testimonies in brilliant detail, which I won't do anymore because I'm embarrassed about all of that now. So if my own personal testimony doesn't even matter to me, yours means even less. And that's fair, because while Christians expected me to revere their testimonies without question just because they said so, they automatically discounted my testimony without respect or consideration. Christians and I had at least one thing in common back then. Through this practice of New Age woo, I thought I had confirmation of psychic energies, such that I arrogantly proclaimed that I had the truth because I thought I could demonstrate it, when really I still hadn't yet discovered the inherently auto-deceptive nature of faith. My friend, the Christian minister, was the only one who seemed incapable of perceiving anything I tried to show him, whether spiritually or scientifically. Nothing was getting through his armor of God, which was really just the helmet of pig-headedness. Other folks were much more open-minded. At one point, I was able to get a few people to see, hear, or feel whatever they expected to perceive, as long as it was something they already believed. I could get a pagan or a lifelong Hindu to see their gods, or a Christian to experience theirs in some way, but I can't get a Christian to see Krishna. It had to be something they already believe. Then, all I needed was the appropriate ambiance. Maybe add a drum circle, or have a group chanting, or sitar music, or solitary meditation, whether by candles or stark incandescent light, which is easier for reading auras. Because I was usually dealing with Wiccans or pagans or druids. Although it's fun to step outside of that sometimes and get a Catholic girl to see demons. That's all too easy. New Age spiritualists train themselves to see and hear things just beyond what can physically be perceived. Which means you're making shit up. That's how hypnosis works. That's all hypnosis is. Like that song by Styx, you're fooling yourself and you don't believe it. Of course, it occurred to me that all these different forms of spirituality are mutually exclusive. They can't all be true at the same time. So these people aren't really seeing these things. I'm just setting the stage and psyching someone out for their imaginations to take over. And when I realized that, I considered the possibility that I might be doing that to myself. And then a moment later, I realized I was fooling myself the same way I was fooling everyone else. Once I applied a skeptical eye to any psychic demonstration, even my own, I knew how the trick was done. The illusion lost its magic. And speaking of magic, I remember in 1982, my dad came home from seeing Doug Henning perform in Las Vegas. And he thought it was real magic. I respected my dad, but I wince at him for this day. And he says, I don't care what religion you are, you got enough sense to wipe your own ass, you can't be no atheist. Because if you're credulous enough, even a stage magician in Las Vegas at a casino is somehow proof of God. It's important to understand the difference between rational and irrational thinking, being the difference between trying to make excuses to cling to what is not supported versus trying to limit yourself only to what is. It's the difference between hoping for what may be possible and admitting whether it's probable, and if not, maybe we should give up on it. I gave up my supernatural beliefs, not because they were disproved, because they weren't, nor could they be. We cannot conclusively prove that God doesn't exist for the same reason that we can't get an innocent conviction in a court of law. The best we can say is that God is not guilty of existing. And then in science, there is only what is supported by evidence, and whatever is not supported doesn't warrant further consideration. Come back when you have something to show. Until then, we have nothing to talk about. And this is my biggest complaint with religion, honestly. I so wish that I could get believers to understand that unsupported assertions, including anecdotal testimony and all citations of Scripture, have zero credence, just like claims that have already been proven false. I don't want to believe improbable claims from questionable sources on insufficient evidence. I don't want to have to believe anything anymore. Why should I ever again want to be fooled into believing something that's not even true? Where's the value in that? Only accurate information has practical application, so I want to understand and improve my understanding and have a way to test what I know to see how accurate my knowledge is and to identify where corrections should be and what those corrections should be. And one thing I corrected was that I learned not to say that anything was true or the truth until or unless I could show the truth of it. Because if you can't show it, you don't know it, and you shouldn't pretend that you do. So I started looking more critically into everything I once believed to see whether there was any truth to it. Was it reasonable to consider that this or that should remain on my shelf of possibilities? Eventually, I noticed that one by one, everything I had been encouraged to believe in my youth, every supernatural claim, was unsupported. It was a painful realization to reevaluate all these experiences that I remember so well and that were once so important to me that were even formative, apparently to my current fashion still. It was it was a difficult thing to realize that none of that really happened, because it couldn't have. And now that I understand how faith can make you see and remember things that evidently never happened, I have a different understanding of truth, one that is much more skeptical of even my own subjective impressions and biases. So whenever some interlocutor says that they have evidence against something I said, I always listen, just in case they might be right about something. And if I'm wrong about that thing, then I need to know so I can fix it and not repeat that same error anymore. I try to steelman their position where I can quote them verbatim and be sure that I understand their argument at least as well as they do before I begin my rebuttal. But notice how believers won't do that, any of it. They take none of the steps that any of us would or should if we want to be sure that we're right or that we want to correct where we might be wrong. They just don't admit that they could be wrong. I will engage them in Socratic interaction because it's important to me to be sure whether my position is at least true enough that it can withstand critical analysis. But believers will not. They have to dodge and deflect direct points or queries in such a way that is increasingly obviously suspicious. They never ask anything in good faith, only questions with presuppositions that will never be corrected. Then they interrupt the answer to ask something else they hope I can't answer because they don't want to know what the answer is. They're only looking for whatever I can't answer because if I don't know it, then they can pretend as if they do. I answer all of their questions in the most appropriate way possible, but they ignore all of mine, such that I have to point out that, hey, this is the 6th time in as many posts that I've asked you the same damn question. Quit dodging it. It's a yes or no question. It's easy. But I cannot get a straight answer because they know they're full of shit. The one thing I find most remarkable about religious extremists is, like creationists, is how anyone can be consistently proven to be absolutely wrong about absolutely everything 100% of the time for such a long time and still think that theirs is the absolute truth. They have no pattern recognition, no credibility, and no accountability. It's as if faith means never admitting when you're wrong, which they are on every point, every time, even about things you've already corrected them on. With all the documentation necessary, they will not admit or correct any error because double down dishonesty is the strength of the faith. And the most you'll ever get is where they change subjects to continue the argument in some other point rather than acknowledging how they were shown to be wrong on all of these other points so far. And several times, believers have asked me what I think the truth is and why it is paramount to science but doesn't matter at all in religion. They ask me that as if there could be different truths for different people, as if whether God exists or whether evolution is real is only the truth for some people and not everyone else. If you say that your creator God is true for me, then it better be true for me too. And if it's not true for me, then it's not true for you either. I have since decided that the truth is what the facts are, only what can be shown to be true, not whatever we thought we knew, or what we might assume or imagine beyond or instead of that, because unsupported speculation is the realm of religious faith. It occurs to me that if you cared about the truth at all, then you would be careful not to say quite so many things that are demonstrably false, and each of your important points would be objectively verifiable. But such is never the case in a religious argument. I figured that much out, but I still didn't think of myself as an atheist. I didn't know what I was. So I chose to identify as an agnostic pagan for Christ. Later, I figured out that I wasn't really pagan, and I wasn't really for Christ either, not after reading the Gospels more attentively. But I was agnostic in the truest sense of the word, which, if you don't know, an atheist is someone who doesn't believe there's a God, and an agnostic is someone who doesn't know that they're atheist. I knew I wasn't Christian, though, and that I never would be again. Jesus was supposed to be the way, the truth, and the life. But what my Christian friend said to me was not the way. It was not the truth. It was a lie. There's a lot wrong with any form of religion, but that one in particular. And my friend admitted to me many years later that he lives by the motto, fake it till you make it. Phrased with those words. And by then, he was an ordained Southern Baptist minister in a Christian school that taught that the Bible is the only source of truth in our world. He had that motto displayed in his office, as if reality itself, whatever we know to be true and everything we can show to be true, is a lie. And only a book of lies counts as the truth. Because demonstrably false and fraudulently fabricated fantasy folklore is sold as the absolute truth with a capital T, even when each religion contradicts every other religion's claims to absolute truth. And over the years, many believers have asked me, what's wrong with lying? Anybody, you get that? What's wrong with lying? Anybody? Okay, I get it a lot. I don't understand what it is. But it's as if they really don't understand that. They say, why does it have to be true before I believe it? Why can't I believe whatever I want to believe, even if it's not true? One guy even told me that he has a right to be wrong. And I said, you're right, you do, but you're in an argument with me, and I have a right to be right. I tell you all this just so that you'll understand why. If you ask me why I believe something, I will give you the reason, because this fact indicates this conclusion as being the most probably correct. It doesn't have to be absolute. Most things aren't. And now, if it turns out that my cited fact wasn't a fact at all, but an erroneous report, maybe something I saw on Onion News, then you don't have to disprove my belief. Once I know that there wasn't good enough reason to believe it in the first place, I already don't believe it anymore, because I'm not beholden to a belief system with required beliefs and prohibited beliefs. I can engage in free thought, wherein blasphemy, heresy, and apostasy are not prohibitions, they're policies. And what alarms me is when I ask believers why they believe whatever they do, is that their reason, if we can call it that, never involves a fact that indicates. Instead, it's always an erroneous assumption of authority. And this they take to such an extreme that they will not even consider the facts I present, no matter how conclusively demonstrated. Instead, they will thoughtlessly dismiss any and all logical arguments or physical evidence, both for my position or against theirs, simply because they want to believe what they want to believe, and they don't care what the truth is. They want to make believe something else instead. It's an emotional crutch, obviously. Studies show that religious belief induces the same endorphins as taking addictive drugs. The same way a junkie defends his habit too. And often the reason that they think that they're better off with Jesus is because they've traded one addiction for another, one that's just more socially acceptable. And it's not that they necessarily think that the claim is true, because I've heard admissions of when they know it isn't. Believers have said that these may be what the facts are, but I prefer to believe this other thing that is unsupported by anything. And one of my oldest friends told me, I'm Christian because I like to believe that, not because I think it's true, having no idea what he had just confessed to me. And others have said that even if they watched evolution happen with their own eyes, they would still deny it. And one woman told me that if she had a time machine and could go back and find Jesus being taken down from the cross and hang out for a week and watch his body rot and never rise again, she said, I know you're going to be disappointed by this answer, but I hope my faith is strong enough to still believe even when my eyes say otherwise. She wants to keep believing even when you know it's not true. How is that a sincere belief? One pastor bragged on a TV documentary. He said that if he were to read somewhere that the Bible says that 2 + 2 = 5, he said, I wouldn't question what I'm reading in the Bible. I would believe it. And that William Jennings Bryan, the lawyer for creationism in the Scopes monkey trial, when he was criticized for believing that the whale swallowed Jonah and Jonah lived 3 days in the whale, Bryan's response was, if the Bible said that Jonah swallowed the whale, I'd believe it. So it doesn't matter how ridiculous it is. Religion isn't about truth. These are not sincere believers. These are make-believers. That's why if you argue on social media, you probably notice that every religious argument is just another lie, another false conclusion based on a faulty premise, an erroneous assumption that is constantly repeated and never corrected. For example, raise your hands if you accept the theory of evolution as the best explanation for the origin of our species. Everybody in the room. Now, keep your hands up only if you think that means that we evolved from a rock. Every hand dropped. Thank you for that. Now, put your hands back up if some creationist accuses you of believing that, or of believing that everything came from nothing, or that evolution means one kind of animal changing into another fundamentally different kind of animal, or anything else you don't believe that they accuse you of believing after you've already told them that you don't believe that. I know that was a complicated question. I seem to have lost a couple of it. Now, and everybody put their hands down. Okay, so we did that to show that religious faith is not and does not like the truth, because every faith is a body of lies, and every apologist is necessarily a habitual and irrational liar. Yes, I said that. I can provide numerous examples of that on demand. In fact, just to demonstrate how dishonest creationism is, I offer a two-part challenge for believers. First, name one evolutionary scientist who lied in the act of promoting evolution over creationism. Quote the lie verbatim and show me how you know whether it was a lie. No creationist has ever answered the first part of that challenge. Although you'd be surprised how many people say, Piltdown Man. Really, that's the name of the scientist? And by the way, Piltdown Man, it was done, one of the motives was because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the guy who wrote Sherlock Holmes, is one of the primary suspects in this case. He's next door neighbor to the lawyer who is, well, the primary suspect. The two of them worked together. They were both at Diggs together. Doyle had written things in his books about how to falsify fossils the same way that it was done, right? So he knew, he was in on the plan. And his problem was he belonged to a supernaturalist society where they believed in fairies, and he wanted to embarrass the British Museum because they believed in naturalism, which means not magic. The second part of that challenge is much easier. Name a professional creationist who did not lie while trying to defend creationism or condemn evolution. In this case, just give me the name. I'll show you where they lied and how we know that the deception was deliberate. Understand that an honorable person knows better than to accuse another of lying unless you can immediately show that what they said, quoted verbatim, was wrong, and that they either knew it was wrong when they said it, or there was no way they even could have known whether it was true when they claimed that it was. I can do that. So Abraham Lincoln once said that it is an established fact in morals that he who makes an assertion without knowing whether it is true or false is guilty of falsehood, and the accidental truth of the assertion does not justify or excuse him. I love that quote. That means that we don't have to give benefit of the doubt just if we can't prove that you're wrong. Instead, it is that if you can't show that you're right, you're not. Because it is dishonest to assert baseless speculation as if it was a matter of fact. Yet that is what every religion does. That's what every faith does. Because faith is the most inherently auto-deceptive position it is possible to have. So if you are a sincere truth seeker, the first thing you have to do is abandon faith. And it seems as if believers have the idea that you can just believe hard enough, then the power of imagination can change reality. A lot of them really do believe that, as if they can simply wish away any inconvenient truth, as if there is no reality, really, as if everything is just a figment of the imagination. It's just a question of whose imagination is strongest. Do they believe whatever they believe harder than you believe whatever you believe? Because everything's imaginary, and we're all wrestling over which imagination controls the steering wheel. It's all mind over matter. It's just a matter of mind, and never mind, it doesn't matter. As you can tell, such people don't have a problem denying any and all aspects of, or any of all facts, because they're not real fans of objective reality. They prefer to be subjective so that it's whatever you want to believe it is. And then when I try to explain the facts, believers say, well, why would I want to believe that? I would much rather believe some other senseless non sequitur that isn't even possible. But it doesn't matter what we want to believe. All that matters is whatever we can show to be true. What is most strongly indicated by the best evidence? The truth is what the facts are. And if you don't care what the facts are, then you don't care what the truth is. Seth liked that quote once. He played it for me. And believers don't care what the truth is. Last week, somebody criticized me for being biased towards objective truth. Now, I always thought that we could either be fooled by our biases, or we could remain objective, that these were choices. But no, now they're the same thing, because according to this guy, they mean the same thing. And he said that, where was it? He said that he admitted that there is no truth, there is no objective truth in religion. There's only religious truth, which is entirely subjective and not true. He said that only religion's truth matters, meaning whatever you want to pretend. He said that believers don't want truth, they want certainty. Something to make believe, even if they know they're wrong. And they criticize me for trying to ruin the only sure ideology that shelters them from the harshness of this life. So from a religious perspective, facts are cold, hard, and inconvenient. And they make up alternative facts to support an alternative reality. And my first face-to-face experience with this was when a church group left a flyer on my door inviting me to, not knowing who I was, of course, inviting me to a local small church in the neighborhood for an intelligent design seminar hosted by somebody from Answers in Genesis. I could not resist. The guy held a 2-hour liathon. And by the time, when they turned it over for questions, I had my notepad scribbled on all over the place, and I stood up and I roasted this guy on every fraudulent statement he had made. And the thing that surprised me was that the audience didn't side with me and thank me and hate that guy for lying to them. They hated me because they paid him to lie to them, and I'm telling them truths they don't care about. They want to believe what they know is not true. How is that sincerely held? That's a fixed belief. That's an entirely different concept. Religious apologists are not sincere believers. Defenders of the faith don't necessarily believe what they profess to believe. Even that is a lie. Instead, they believe in belief, because someone told me on the way up here that they think that believing makes them better people, healthier, prettier, happier. Even if that was true, and I don't think it is, but even if it was, that wouldn't matter to sincere, honest, or rational people. Now, some of you in this room might have been healthier or prettier back when you believed, but only because you were so much younger back then. But raise your hands if when you were a believer, you were generally happier than you are now. Crickets. Yeah, not one hand went up. And not that that's just a fact. There's 100 people or so in this room, maybe more, but that's just a fact. Nobody cares about those anymore, right? So we know that belief does not make one better. It certainly doesn't make one more moral. In fact, there are a bunch of studies and statistics to show otherwise, but you don't need all of that to notice that the Bible implies that it doesn't matter how evil you are. All sins may be forgiven if you but believe. But if you don't believe, then it doesn't matter how good you are, because the only sin that will not be forgiven is the sin of disbelief. Thus, we see that morality is irrelevant in both Christianity and Islam, where you have to believe whatever you're told to believe without question, reservation, or reason. The Quran frequently repeats that simply believing equates to doing good, and that not believing equates to doing evil. Thus we see that morality is irrelevant in either religion, and that both have gullibility as the main criteria for redemption. If morality mattered, then God would allow and God would accept good-hearted, kind, and charitable humanitarians regardless whether they believed in the wrong religion or in no religion, and he would reject even his most devout believers who have time and again revealed themselves to be god-awful, amoral monsters despite their indisputable faith. Christians and Muslims both say that they're not supposed to lie either, but if they couldn't lie, then they couldn't proselytize. Certainly not the way they currently do. Fundamentalist defenders of the faith know exactly what lies they have to tell at each cue, and they know there's no way around that because it is not possible to defend fundamentalism honestly. You either admit and correct your errors and ultimately stop being a creationist, or you double down on every false assertion and thus stop being honest. And let's be honest. Even Christian geneticists admit that Adam and Eve are genetically impossible and never existed. Both physical and cultural anthropologists can explain how the Garden of Eden is not as old as it was reputed to be. and how it was influenced by tropes and characters inspired by the previously polytheist mythology of other religions in neighboring regions. And likewise, archaeologists consistently say that the Tower of Babel never happened either, and neither did the Exodus, and the character of Moses never even existed. Even Christian geologists, biologists, physicists, and practically anybody else can confirm that the global flood of Noah's Ark never happened either. We know that for certain. We can prove it. We already have repeatedly for decades. We can disprove some things, but science has a rule against proving anything in the positive sense, because even if what can be shown to be true might only be true to a point where there is still more to know. And that's why all the success of chemistry and nuclear energy will never prove atomic theory, because proving any theory is against the rules. Otherwise, the theory of relativity would have been proved 100 years ago, and evolution would have been proven already before then, and many more times since. Evolution is an inescapable fact to population genetics, fossils, and phylogeny, and the scriptures are man-made mythology with no truth in them, no significant truth, certainly, and not even the existence of God would change either of these facts. So why are we still debating yahoos who don't even know what these terms mean? Because we live in a post-truth world where I could be taken seriously even if I stood before you and told you that I was 6'3" and 215 pounds, and you know that both of those numbers can't be true at the same time. That's what Trump said when he was arrested for doing nothing 91 times. Everyone knows he's lying again about everything, as always, but he's still the front runner because the truth doesn't matter to these people. They can lie about their entire resume, including how many times their mom died, and they still won't lose their Senate seat. If they lost an election, they just say that they won and keep repeating until somebody believes them. And if they're facing prosecution, they can confess on camera while also demanding that it's not a crime, as if that they can change the law with a lie and declassify documents with the power of their mind. And all the news is fake because everyone else is lying except me, and all the experts anywhere were involved in a massive, cohesive global conspiracy against my alternative reality, and nobody knows more about anything than I do, believe me. Believe me. Can you believe that? There was a time when your reputation was ruined if you were caught in a lie. A time when folks were embarrassed about being exposed as stupid. And now they brag about both. And they think it's fine to lie and deny whatever you don't want to believe. You can just say that you believe whatever, and that's fine. That's your right. You don't have to explain or defend it. But if you assert it as a fact, then you better be able to prove it. Religion gets to lie about everything all the time and still claim absolute truth. But if a secular academic ever asserted any falsehood the way religious apologists always do, they would be blasted by their own associates. I've seen it happen, both to other people and to myself as well. I have to be very careful about what I say, because in the few times that I have said something that I thought was true at the time but turned out not to be, if I don't catch it and correct it myself first, other atheists, people who may agree with me on everything else, have slammed me over whatever error they found. And while I think that that's an overreaction in my case, because I am sincere, I am amenable to correction, and there are more polite and productive ways that I could have been corrected, I still respect that those who care about the truth are so unforgiving of falsehood. You can't convince any of us that you care about what's right unless you make an effort to correct what's wrong. Thank you.